I'm going to start with our introductions. So welcome. Thank you guys for joining us for our Manatees and Safe Boating webinar. Our presenters today from Save the Manatee Club are Cora Burcham and Dr. Beth Brady. So they're going to talk to you guys about safe boating and manatees, and then at the end we'll have room for questions and answers. Feel free to use both the chat and then the Q&A to submit those questions. We'll keep an eye on that. And Cora, I guess whenever you're ready.
All right, sounds good, Stephanie. Thank you so much for the introduction and welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. I'm going to be sharing my screen so that way you can actually see something more interesting than my face. All right, so here we go. So I'm Cora Burcham. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Manatee Research Associate for Save the Manatee Club. And it is National Safe Boating Week, which started last Saturday on the 18th and is running until this Friday. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to share some information about manatees, about safe boating, as we are starting the busy summer boating season here in Florida. And like as Stephanie said, we also have Dr. Beth Brady, our Senior Conservation Associate, with us here tonight. And I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation, and then we will both be here to answer your questions. Oops, and I am sorry. Oops, there we go. All right, so we'll start just to give you a brief overview of this presentation. I will start with a brief introduction of manatees, just to provide you with a little bit of background. Then we will very briefly talk about threats manatees are facing today. And then we'll go into really the gist of this presentation, which is safe boating, since it is National Safe Boating Week. And this will also include a brief overview on how to prevent prop scarring of seagrass beds, because that is very closely related to manatees. And then I will wrap it up with some brief slides about how to spot and report distressed and injured manatees. This actually used to be a presentation in and of itself, but I thought it would be a really good addition to have in this presentation, because so many people see manatees and may not necessarily know what to look out for, or what a distressed manatee may look like, or what to do when you see one. So I thought it would be good to include that. And then we will wrap it up with some Q&As. And just this morning, I actually realized that exactly 2 years ago on this date, I was involved in one of my biggest manatee rescues to date. So I just had to include these pictures here on the opening slide. This is manatee Reckless and her calf Churro. They were rescued together, like I said, exactly 2 years ago. And as you can see, Reckless here, that's the mom on the picture on the right. She had been pretty severely injured by a boat, and no one really thought she was going to be able to pull through. She was rescued with her newborn calf, Churro. Churro is in that little tub on the bottom picture over there, and they were rehabilitated at SeaWorld Orlando, and we were actually able to release both of them back out into the wild earlier this year. So Reckless made a full recovery, which is absolutely incredible. And Churro grew into a very healthy 2-year-old female, and they're both now out in the wild again. So feel good story to open with, and I just had to include these pictures. So just a brief overview of manatees. They are large, fully aquatic mammals. On average, they are about 8 to 10 feet long and weigh between 8 and 1,200 pounds. But we do have some manatees that grow quite a bit larger. We have some individuals that are over 2,000 pounds or between 12 and 13 feet long. Manatees are native to Florida, so some people believe that they were introduced in the 1970s or 80s to control invasive vegetation in Florida. That is not the case. The fossil record for manatees actually goes back millions of years, so they were in Florida long before people ever set foot on Florida. Manatees can live in salt, fresh, and brackish water, and they can freely go in between all of those. So you will find them in shallow coastal areas, estuaries, rivers, springs, as well as some lakes, as long as they are connected to an open waterway. They are subtropical animals, which means they do need water warmer than 68 degrees Fahrenheit to survive. So in the winter time, when the water temperatures drop below 68, they start migrating to these warm water sources. So you'll find them in very large numbers at natural springs, as well as the outflow of power plants. So on the bottom right here, you can see a very large aggregation of manatees in a natural spring. This is Blue Spring State Park, northeast of Orlando, where they congregate in the hundreds during the winter time. Manatees are herbivorous, so they eat a variety of submerged, emergent, and floating plants. That includes anything from seagrasses to freshwater grasses, as well as floating vegetation such as water lettuce, water hyacinth, alligator weed, pennywood. So they're not very picky. They pretty much eat anything that is green and available to them. Female manatees have a calf every 2 to 5 years after about 13 months of gestation, so about a year-long pregnancy, and they care for their calf for up to 2 years. So as you can imagine, the reproductive rate is pretty slow, and it is a pretty big investment into each calf. Twins are rare, so it's usually just one calf born at a time. In the spring and summer months, so just around right now, mating herds are very common. So this is when the female goes into estrus or heat and is surrounded by multiple males. You can see that in the picture on the bottom right. This is oftentimes in very shallow water, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in another slide, but this is what it looks like. Manatees are slow moving. They usually swim around 3 to 5 miles an hour, can go up to 20 miles per hour in short bursts, but they're usually pretty slow moving, and that's important when we talk about safe boating. Their closest living land relative is the elephant, so lots of people may think they're related to the dolphin, the whale, a walrus, or a seal. The only thing that they have in common with these animals is that they're all aquatic animals, but they actually have a common ancestor with the elephant as well as with the hyrax, which is a small, furry little creature. Manatees don't have any significant natural predators, so you will find them in close vicinity to alligators or sharks, and usually there's no aggression between the species. So now going into some of the threats that manatees are facing, I kind of combined them on this one slide, as I don't want to go into great detail about every single one of them, but I think it just is a good background for everyone to understand what kind of threats they are facing. So watercraft is still the biggest cause or known cause of human-caused mortality for manatees, and over 90% of manatees in Florida will have some sort of scars on them from watercraft collisions, which you can see in the first picture here. Entanglements are another issue for manatees, so oftentimes they get entangled in fishing line or crab traps or other sorts of debris around their flippers or their tails. Entrapment is a problem for them. Manatees are very curious, so oftentimes they will check things out, such as pipes or culverts after hurricanes. When they can access areas that are usually inaccessible to them, they will start venturing into these areas. So entrapment can become a problem for them as well. Kind of similar to entanglement, ingestion of debris is an issue for manatees as they're grazing on the bottom for their food. They oftentimes inevitably pick up our trash, such as plastic or rope, fishing gear, fishing hooks, as you can see in this picture. So all those kind of things that are in the water that are discarded in the waterways or blow into the waterways can become very dangerous for manatees. And oftentimes when they ingest them and the things get stuck in their stomachs or intestines, that can be fatal. In the wintertime, cold water is another issue for manatees. Like I said, they are a tropical species, so they have to find that warm water. And if they don't find that in time, they can get cold stress syndrome. Loss of habitat is really the #1 threat to manatees nowadays. I could give a whole presentation just about that. So just to briefly touch upon this, lots of manatees rely on the warm water outflow of artificial power plants. So they will congregate at these plants, and as these power plants are going offline, those manatees are basically left without a warm water source. So they need to learn how to use other warm water sources. Lots of springs they have historically used are inaccessible, and with more and more people moving to Florida basically every single day, all of us want to live by the water, so we're really encroaching on their habitat. And then last but not least, red tide and algae blooms are always a problem for manatees. As most of you may know, we had a very large unusual mortality event over the last couple of years due to algae blooms, primarily in the Indian River Lagoon. That situation has gotten a little bit better, but lots of manatees were actually starving to death due to lack of food sources. Since it is National Safe Boating Week and I'm going to be talking about safe boating, I just want to give a bit more information and background about watercraft collisions. In 2023, in the state of Florida, we had 89 fatalities due to watercraft, and this is for those where the cause of death was known. So there's a large percentage of manatees that go down as undetermined or not necropsied, which means they were not actually collected to do an autopsy on them. So the real number could be much higher than that. And 27 were rescued due to watercraft collisions. In 2024 so far, we have had 37 fatalities due to watercraft and 8 rescues, and that's as of mid-May. Manatees can hear boats, but oftentimes they just can't move out of the way fast enough to avoid being struck. And as you can see here in this picture, I actually really like this graphic on the right. You can see sort of what the manatee looks like on the inside. The part that's marked in red there is the manatee's lung. So as you can see, it is very long. It extends all the way from sort of the neck area down towards the tail. And right over the lung, you see those rib bones. And oftentimes when a manatee gets hit by a boat anywhere on the back, it can break a rib and that can puncture a lung. And that can then become really, become a problem for the manatee. So, since it is Safe Boating Week, we are now going to be talking about some safe boating tips, which is probably the reason why you joined this webinar, to learn about safe boating and about how to spot a manatee. So, if you're out on your boat, one thing you can do is watch for manatee footprints. So what do I mean by that? Those are circular patterns on the top of the water that the manatee makes with its tail when it's swimming. So you can see that in the top picture here on the left-hand side. So if you see those kind of circles or disturbances on top of the water, it's a very good indication that there are manatees around. You'll also want to look for manatee snouts as they surface for air. So manatees have these 2 little nostrils on top of their snout. They don't have a blowhole like a dolphin or a whale. And you will see them come up to the surface, and they usually exhale and then inhale and go back down. So if you do see a little set of nostrils popping up, again, that's a good indication that there are manatees in the vicinity. Especially in shallow areas, you want to watch out for manatees, particularly near seagrass beds and vegetation. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is an aerial photo that was taken with a drone. Manatees are oftentimes very, very difficult to see, especially in turbid waters. In the springs, it's pretty easy to see them, but most of our waterways in Florida, they're not crystal clear, so it can be very difficult to see them from the surface. So especially if you are in a shallow area or anywhere near grass beds or vegetation, you want to keep an extra eye out for them. So how do you safely operate a vessel around manatees? First of all, you want to try to keep a minimum of 50 feet between your boat and a manatee, at least if you see the manatee. And if you see manatee, turn off your motor. So you want to make sure to give them some space and don't drift over them or go right over them. Obeying posted speed limits and becoming familiar with seasonal manatee protection zones, which include slow speed and no wake zone, as well as sanctuaries, that's really important. We have lots of people coming to Florida to visit and to boat from out of state, or even people that live in Florida. And these speed zones sometimes change seasonally. So if you are near a warm water aggregation site in the wintertime, there's a good chance that this is an idle speed zone. Now, if you are in an area during the summertime where there's a lot of feeding grounds or travel corridors that manatees are using, there's a good chance that area will be a slow speed zone at other times of the year. So before you go out on a boat, it's a really good idea to educate yourself about the area that you're going to be boating in and get familiar with the speed zones in those areas. You also want to check around your vessel before starting the motor to make sure that manatees are not nearby. So as you can see in the picture over here, like I said, manatees are very curious creatures, so sometimes they will approach boats. And if you were to just start your motor, there's a good chance that manatees might be around there. And that's one of the main reasons that it is discouraged, or actually it's illegal to give food or water to manatees, because you really don't want to attract them to your vessel. If a manatee associates people or vessels with food, they are just much more likely to approach. And then this is exactly what happens. It will approach, it will be right by the propeller or the motor. And then if you don't look before turning it on, that can result in pretty severe injuries for the manatee. When you're out boating, try to stay in deeper water channels instead of going right over vegetation or be in shallow water. But even when you're boating in deeper water, be aware that manatees also use those channels to travel. So there's always a chance that manatees are in those channels as well. All right, like I said, going slow in manatee habitat is really the #1 thing to do. Lots of collisions actually happen when manatees get struck by a fast-speeding boat versus the propeller. So 60% of manatee fatalities are actually due to the impact of a fast-moving vessel. And that can be anything from a large powerboat to a small boat, all the way to a jet ski. The boat doesn't even necessarily have to be a propeller to have a propeller to injure the manatee. So lots of fatalities are actually caused by a blunt force trauma. Wearing polarized sunglasses, I really like this picture. That's why I put it on the slide here. This is a photo I took a couple of years ago here in Florida. This is exactly the same photo taken with a polarized lens and without. So as you can see on the bottom, you can really see those manatees versus on the top, it is really difficult to see them. So even if you're not boating, if you're fishing or you're just wildlife viewing, having these polarized sunglasses just makes an enormous difference. They are very inexpensive, so I encourage everybody who is out there to get a pair of polarized sunglasses. It really makes a world of a difference. Having a designated spotter on your vessel is a really good idea too. So if you're the one driving the boat, having somebody to be on the lookout for wildlife, that can include manatees, dolphins, turtles, all those kind of things, all those kind of animals. And then report any distressed manatees to the FWC. I put the number on here. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's what you want to call. That's the hotline you would want to call if you see any sick or injured manatees. And Save the Manatee Club provides waterway signs, waterway cards, and safe boater packets free of charge. I will give some information at the very end of the presentation on how to obtain them, but I just put an example here of a decal that we offer and some dock signs as well that have, again, the FWC number on there to call if you see something. Now, like I said, we also want to talk just a little bit about prop scarring and how to prevent this. So this is actually a drone image that Dr. Beth Brady took and provided to us. So as you can see here, those lines that you see going through there, those bright colored lines, those are actually scars from propellers. So if you are boating over seagrass in shallow water, be sure to trim your motor up and idle to a safe depth before going on plane. If you accidentally do run aground, turn off your motor and try to pull or push the boat to a safe depth. So try to not damage the seagrass while you're going over there. Avoid anchoring on top of seagrass beds. So again, if you're dropping an anchor, you're pulling up an anchor, you can pretty much inadvertently pull up the seagrass or the bottom. So try to avoid doing that over seagrass beds and vegetation. And whenever possible, try to avoid seagrass beds and use the deep navigation channels or deeper water when under power. So not only to protect manatees, but also to protect their seagrasses, which are really a primary food source for them. All right, so now we're going to go into kind of the last part of the PowerPoint, and I want to give a few tips on how to spot a sick or injured manatee, because many times people, they want to do the right thing and they may not be really that familiar with manatees, and they see something and they really don't know, well, is that normal behavior? Is that something that I should be concerned about? So just a few tips that should help with that. So first of all, you want to make sure, see, is the manatee floating high in the water or maybe listing to the side. So here on the left-hand side, you can see a manatee that is clearly not submerged. You can see part of the back kind of sticking out. Oftentimes, a manatee like that will try to dive down and then it will pop right back up, just like a cork. So this is a good indication that something is wrong. There could be a lung injury from a boat, there could be a GI issue, but this is not normal behavior. It could also be listing to one side. So if it's not level in the water, but it's kind of swimming on its side, again, that's something to be concerned about. Now, on the right-hand side, as I mentioned before, this is a manatee mating herd. This is natural behavior. Sometimes this is seen in very shallow water. The best thing to do here is observe that from a distance. And this is, like I said, this is normal behavior, especially at this time of the year. You may be seeing that pretty frequently anywhere around Florida. You also want to try to see if the manatee has any fresh or open wounds. So on the left-hand side here, this is a manatee that got recently hit by a broke propeller. So you can see those are kind of pretty deep indentation. Sometimes you can see some pink or red spots in there versus what you see on the right-hand side, which is a manatee with a healed white scar. Now, sometimes it is a little bit difficult to tell if something is fresh or not and whether it's a concern or not. So anytime, if in doubt, report it to the hotline and then a biologist can take a look at it and figure out if it's something that needs further attention. You also want to look at the manatee's respiration. So, like I said, manatees do have those little nostrils and they do come up for air. A healthy manatee will breathe about every 2 to 5 minutes when they are active. And they can stay submerged for up to 20 minutes when they're resting or sleeping. Now, if a manatee comes up more frequently and it's not very active and it breathes about every 30 seconds to a minute, that's a good indication that something is wrong. And oftentimes, this will be the first thing that the biologists from the hotline that you're calling will ask you. Can you measure the manatee's respiration rate? Well, that may sound a little difficult or a little strange, but actually it's a very, very easy thing to do. So most of us, nowadays have a watch or a smartphone or anything. So you basically just count how many times within 5 minutes the manatee comes up to the surface to breathe. And that's a really good indication. If it does come up very frequently alongside with some other unusual behavior, that's a good indication for the biologist that this manatee is in distress. Cold stress is something we don't really have to worry about at this time of the year because it is getting pretty hot, but just I wanted to include this as well for future reference. So cold stress manatees appear very skinny. They are often very lethargic, which means they don't really move around a lot. Oftentimes they have white lesions, especially on their snout, their tail, and their flippers, as you can see here in the picture on the right-hand side. Also, like I was just saying, rapid breathing, so they breathe a lot more frequently than they would if they were not injured. And oftentimes these cold stress manatees are not near a warm water site in the wintertime. Another thing you want to look for is the manatee stranded or is it a possible orphan all by itself? So manatees are fully aquatic mammals, which means they do not come out of the water to sun themselves. I do a lot of my research work at Blue Spring State Park, and more than once I have been asked by some of the visitors when the manatees are coming out to sun themselves. And I think people are probably just thinking about walruses or seals or sea lions that kind of haul themselves out of the water on the rocks and, lie in the sun. Manatees do not do that. So if you see a manatee that is stranded, such as the one here on the right-hand side, this is definitely something you would want to report. Do not try to maneuver that manatee back into the water. Most likely the manatee got out of the water for a reason, meaning it is tired or it's sick or something is wrong. So if you are pushing it back into the water, chances are it's going to strand itself again in worse condition than it was before. Also, manatees, they're very gentle animals, but they are extremely heavy. So anyone approaching a manatee that is stranded can possibly not just injure the manatee, but also injure themselves. So keep a distance, and that's something you would want to report. Also, calves, like I said, depend on mom for the first 1 or 2 years of their life. which means if you see a small calf all by themselves, that is something you would want to call in as well, because they should be with an adult. If you see a manatee at that size over there in those two pictures, that is something that is not normal as well. So, okay, so you have determined that something is not quite right with the manatee. So where are we going from here? When in Florida, you want to call the FWC hotline, and this is the number that I put on there in purple. That's the 1-888-404-3922. This is a 24/7 hotline, and you will be connected to a biologist who can then reroute your call to the biologist who is responsible for the area that you're calling from. You can also download the FWC Wildlife Alert app. So if you're on your phone or your computer, just Google FWC Wildlife Alert app, and you can download that and use it as a reporting tool as well. If possible, try to stay with the manatee. Manatees are obviously, they do move around, and you go. There's a good chance that the biologists are going to have a really hard time relocating the manatee. So the best thing is to call it right away, and if possible, staying with the manatee and trying to keep an eye on it. Answer your phone when the FWC biologist calls you back for further instructions. So if you call the number, stay with the manatee, and they're going to be calling you back. Like I emphasized before, I want to re-emphasize it again. Do not push a stranded manatee back into the water. And also, if you come across an entangled manatee, try to not remove those entanglements yourself. And this is something that many people do because they think they can help the manatee and they can kind of solve the situation all by themselves. What oftentimes happens is, especially manatees entangled in a crab trap, someone from the public will cut off the buoy, which is on the top, but the entanglement that is around the flipper or the tail may actually still be there. So now it's going to be a lot more difficult for the rescue staff to actually find that manatee. That buoy will be on the surface, so that's pretty easy to spot. Now, once that buoy is gone, it's going to be very difficult to find a manatee that just has line around its flipper. And oftentimes that line is so deeply embedded, like in a manatee here on the left-hand side that had to be rescued and actually needed to be treated by a veterinarian. This was not something that could be treated in the field by just cutting it off and letting it go. All right, just really brief. How does a rescue of a manatee even work? So now you are boating out on the waterway, you've seen a manatee, you have reported it, so what's next? Manatees are usually rescued with a very large net, either way from land or from a specialized rescue boat. As you can see here on the bottom, this is the FWC rescue boat. They are hauling the manatee with a net out of the water and putting it onto the boat, which has actually the motor is in the front and then the back is open, so they lift the manatee in there. Manatees can be out of the water for prolonged periods of time, so they do not crush under their own weight. They can be transported in a transport truck on a very thick foam mat. They just have to be sprayed down with a little bit of water when it's warm, or covered in blankets when it's cold. So they do not have to be in water to be transported. They can actually be transported in a truck for a couple of hours. So they will be transported in that transport truck to a critical care facility. As you can see here on the upper right-hand corner, this is actually a picture taken at Zoo Tampa at Lowry Park. They are doing an assessment, a health assessment, and a procedure on that manatee. They have really nice lift floors where they can do procedures very quickly and then bring the manatee down back into the water. So all of this, just to give you an idea, is a collaborative effort between many different organizations. I don't necessarily need you to memorize all of this, or just to give you an idea of like how many different organizations are involved in the manatee rescue and rehabilitation partnership. So it's really not just one organization that does it all. It's a collaboration between all the different agencies on the state and federal level, nonprofits, the ocean area that take care of those manatees. So it's a really big collaboration of partners who are involved in manatee rescues, rehab, and release, and the post-release monitoring. All right, so where can you obtain some more information, and what are some more ways to help? Since it is National Safe Boating Week, of course, we want to try to push all those materials that we're offering. So I just put 2 pictures on here just to mix it up a little bit. On top here, this is my little sidekick, my little manatee with his life vest, which is very important to wear every time you're boating or jet skiing or paddling, kayaking. Always make sure to wear that PFD. And he's also featuring a safe boating card here, which you can obtain free of charge. It's an online program you can do, and then you get that safe boating certificate. And then on the bottom, it shows some materials that you can order from Save the Manatee Club. Oops, and that one in the wrong order. So like I said, taking a safe boating class is a really great way to start. You can just Google safe boating or FWC safe boating. There's a lot of free boating classes that are offered that you can take online, and then you get this card that you're seeing here in this picture with that little stuffed manatee. And that's a great way to get started and learn some more on how to safely operate a boat. The link to order some free materials from Save the Manatee Club is the one I put here in purple, savethemanatee.org/resources. So that's where you can order some decals, some waterway cards, our yellow dock signs, boating banners, so all those kind of things. You can also assist researchers with sightings of manatees. So if you're seeing a healthy manatee, you can report that to our online sighting form at savethemanatee.org/sightings. This is a site that we launched about a year or 2 ago, and it's super helpful for us and our co-researchers to learn more about where manatees are, how they're moving around, what travel corridors they're using, as well as any out-of-state sightings, which we immediately share with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we don't sit on that data. We do share that with a lot of other agencies and organizations, so we can all together have a better idea where manatees are located. You can also donate to Save the Manatee or adopt a manatee to become a member. So you can check that out at savethemanatee.org/adopt. Sign up for our newsletter and action alerts at savethemanatee.org/sign up. So that's something that people from anywhere can do, whether you live in Florida or anywhere else. Anytime we need help with any action items, that's a good way to get started. And last but not least, I had to put that in there, watch manatees on our webcams at manateetv.org. So we do have webcams now at Blue Spring State Park, at Homosassa, and at Silver Spring State Park. So the Silver Spring ones we just launched this year. So really exciting. So you can do that. And of course, follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So we always have a lot of content, especially right now for National Safe Boating Week. We do have a lot of material going out. So if you're looking for a way to become involved and to help sharing our posts with your followers or your audience, that can really make a huge difference. Tons of people nowadays get their news from social media. They're just, scrolling through our reels, all those kind of things. So it may seem like a small difference, but it's really something that everybody can do. So make sure you follow us and share some of our content there as well. And with that, I am at the end of my PowerPoint presentation. So I will direct it back over to Stephanie and see if we have any questions that Beth or I could answer.
Yes, so there's someone submitted into the Q&A. They said on Lake Okeechobee, it's very dark water, and they also have a lot of night fishermen out on the water, where obviously visibility is poor. Is there any advice for those kind of boaters?
I can take that. It gets the best, and Corey, you can chime in if you'd like. I think the best method here is to just drive at a slow rate of speed. I'm assuming these boaters are probably using GPS or some kind of navigational tool to get them back, particularly because their visibility is poor at night to begin with. So I would hope that they would take their time and not speed on the water. Like, the most important thing to know is those blunt force impacts is what really injures the animal. So traveling at a slower rate of speed would probably be really beneficial to help protect the animal.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think I have anything to add. Obviously, boating at night presents a much bigger challenge than boating during the day. So yeah, just try to be extra careful because manatees, they don't really have a diurnal rhythm like other animals or like we do. They don't really sleep at night and then up during the day. They're kind of like up and about at any time. So even during the night, you may encounter them.
Okay. We have another question in the chat. It's where do most seagrasses grow? Like depth, temperature, near fringes of waterways?
So seagrasses are mostly in shallow coastal areas. They can be in anywhere from a couple of feet to a couple of meters in depth. They're really diverse habitats, like I said. So they're throughout coastal Florida. If you ever want to check out, there's a really neat coastal map done by Florida Fish and Wildlife. If you go to their GIS database, that actually shows you the location of all the seagrasses and where they are in Florida. And I had a question for Cora that I know maybe you wanted to talk about. Could you potentially tell them, our attendees, the difference between an entanglement with a crab trap or something maybe like a tether or something that might be attached to the animal?
Absolutely, yeah, and I should have included that in my presentation. That is a very good point, and I wish I had a visual to share right now. But so yes, crab traps and manatee tracking devices or tags can look very, very similar. So a manatee tracking device consists of a belt that goes around where the manatee's tail meets the body. It's also called the peduncle. And you have a 3 to 4 foot long tether, and then you have a satellite tag at the top. That satellite tag will transmit data to an orbiting satellite, and so the researchers can actually see on their computer where those manatees are. Now, these tracking devices are designed to break off. So they have several weak links. If the manatee gets stuck on something, it will break off. That's a safety thing for the manatee. And those tags are actually the lifeline for especially newly released manatees. They rely on these tags to learn how to be a wild manatee. And if they don't do what they need to do, researchers can intervene. Now, if they're losing those tags, researchers try to do their best to reattach them, but that's why people should really be completely hands-off with these animals. Now, a crab trap may look very similar. It also may have a white floating ball sort of on the top. However, the manatee tracking device will very clearly say manatee tag on it, do not touch. So if you see something, definitely, like I said, don't cut it off. You can call in both tagged as well as entangled manatees to the FWC. But yeah, good information. And if you are following us on our social media, we have like a big post pinned to the top of our page that talks about that as well.
Great. And we have another question. So when kayaking or paddling, what kind of care should we take? They mentioned I've seen people diving with manatees in Florida Springs. And what is your opinion on that?
I'll take this one too. And Corey, you can add to it if you like. So when kayaking or paddling, we highly recommend that you stay at least 2 kayak lengths away from the animal. So one of the things that I commonly see in people is when they see a manatee, they like to kayak and paddle right up to get a really good closer look at it. And most of the time when you're doing that, the manatee can sense that you're coming and they're starting to leave and go away from you. It can cause a disturbance of the animal. So your best bet is if you see a manatee, take your kayak, your paddle out of the water, sit there. I always say, don't chase, just chill, sit back and relax and watch the manatee from at least 2 kayak lengths away. And if you do that, more than likely the manatee might even come and approach you. They do approach kayaks from time to time, and they may be curious and approach you. So if they don't feel like they're being chased, they're more likely to come and look at you. Diving with manatees in Florida Springs. So you never want to habituate animals to human presence. So diving with them or being in the water with manatees, although it does happen in some locations, may not be what's best for the animal.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I could add to that is, if you do go out and, swim or dive anywhere with manatees, practice passive observation, which really means you want to watch manatees from a safe distance. Again, like Beth was saying, don't try to touch them or trying to chase them, especially in the winter time. They really rely on these springs for warmth. They're not there to be entertained by people. They really need to conserve their energy, because if they move out of those springs and they have to go into the colder water or expend more energy because they have to move away from people, that can be really detrimental to them, because they're burning more calories than they really should. And especially if you're seeing a mother with her calf, those really deserve extra protection because you really want to make sure they don't get separated. Unfortunately, separation at such a young age is most likely going to be fatal for the calf, and oftentimes they're not able to reunite and just causes extra stress. So no matter if you're swimming or paddling, just give manatee mothers and calves just a bit more space. And like Beth was saying, they're extremely curious. So chances are if you just chill and sit there and float there and wait, they may actually approach you. So well, and since Beth, since you kicked a question to me, maybe I'll kick one back to you. I know you have done a lot of research with manatee acoustics and how they vocalize and how they hear. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about can manatees hear boats? Like, why do they get hit by boats? Are they just like kind of too dumb to hear them? So what's going on with that?
Great question, Cora. So yeah, manatees can definitely hear boats. One of the problem is that manatees, they have 6 cervical vertebrae, which most animals have 7. So which means manatees don't have the ability to turn their heads, right? We always say manatees can say yes, but they can't say no. So they don't have the ability to turn their heads. So when you're in the water, and if you've ever been in the water and heard a sound, it's really hard to know where it's coming from. You actually have the ability to turn your head. Manatees have to turn their whole body. So when sound is coming from behind them, so here's a manatee in front and a boat in back, it's a lot harder for them to localize where it's coming from. The other part is the speed of the boat. They can hear it, but if they're going too fast, you don't give the manatee enough time to get out of the way. So long story short, they definitely hear it, but we have to slow down. So we give those manatees a lot of time to get out of the way of an approaching boat.
Absolutely.
Oh, and we just got another question. Okay, so with changes in water warming, are you finding manatees in areas they were not in before?
I don't think we've seen changes per se that. I think we've seen more changes related to changes in their habitat, namely loss of seagrass, which is a huge problem right now. Like Cora talked about earlier, you've seen the losses of seagrass on the east coast of Florida. We're also seeing losses of seagrass on the west coast of Florida. So manatees are having to find new habitat in which to forage in, new locations where to forage in. And that's most of the things that we're seeing manatees changing their migration routes and where they're going. They also have to look for warm water outflows. So sometimes these power plants have gone offline for a period of time to repower. Organizations like Florida Fish and Wildlife have monitored where these animals go when power plants shut down. And that's something we need to know for the future. So it's mostly a change in their habitat that we're seeing currently, as opposed to changes in water warming. But the water warming will probably eventually have an impact on the seagrasses. Seagrasses don't tolerate really, really hot temperatures either for long periods of time. So that's something we'll probably see more of a problem with in the upcoming years as the waters get warmer.
And I just have maybe 2 very brief additions. Everything, Beth, you were saying is definitely, that's the way to go. We have seen quite a bit of seagrass regrowth now in the Mosquito Lagoon, which is on the Atlantic coast of Florida, in South Volusia County and northern Brevard County. So we do have a lot of manatees now in that area, and unfortunately, we're also seeing an increase in boating accidents in that area, just because we have more manatees using that area that maybe boaters were used to seeing before the seagrass had regrown in that area. Also, as we are going into the fall or the winter, some of those manatees that are migrating out of state, for example, into Georgia or the Carolinas or over into like Alabama, even as far west as Texas, there were just a couple of sightings in Texas a few weeks ago. Boaters in those areas need to really be on the lookout as well. And in my presentation, I was talking mostly about how to report manatees in Florida. Now, everything I've said applies to out of state as well. And if you are, joining us today from out of state and you seeing a manatee, that should be reported to your local stranding network. So you can find that information either on our website or by Googling like your local stranding network. Every state has their own local stranding network that they work together with. So if you do see a manatee, especially as we're getting into like the cooler season, those should be reported as well.
Great, and we have 2 more questions actually now. So someone said, can you share some insight how the efforts of SMC and partners in environmental education are impacting the population and mortality rate nowadays?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to answer that one either. I think most of what they're doing is a lot of education like we are now about the impacts and what kind of human factors are related to manatee mortality. So there's a lot of education going on, particularly how to protect their habitat, whether it's not using fertilizer on your lawns during summer months, safe boating like this. There's multiple ways that I think there's multiple efforts done by a lot of our partners to educate people on how to lessen their or mitigate their impacts on manatees.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with that. And unfortunately, with the unusual mortality event that we had, a lot of attention, manatees did get a lot of attention. It's sad that it had to come to something like that for manatees for people to realize what was going on and what was wrong. But it did raise a lot of attention, and a lot of people started to, ask how can we help? How can we make a difference? So along with so many of our partners, whether it is seagrass restoration projects or projects to address water quality issues or simply education, has gone a long way. Now, does it have a direct effect on reducing the mortality rate? That's really difficult to say, but I mean, I would hope so.
Okay. Getting lots of questions in now. Okay, so someone said that they reported 2 separate healthy manatee sightings in the Port Canaveral Channel and next to the jetties to our website. Is this location on? I can't see seagrass on the bottom, just algae on the rocks. Can manatees eat the algae on the rocks?
So if I'm correct in my geographic location, Cape Canaveral is very close to the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, where there is and the Mosquito Lagoon, I believe, where they're seeing a lot more of the seagrass, and manatees do migrate and travel around their locations. Maybe they go to a few different grazing patches. Maybe they're finding a freshwater source there. And will they eat algae? They'll definitely eat algae as well off the rocks if they can get access to it. We've seen manatees haul themselves on their pectoral flippers out of the water to eat grass off of someone's lawn. So if they can get to it, more than likely they'll eat it.
And then speaking of seagrass, someone wants to know, how can we get more seagrasses? Is there anything we can do to cultivate growth besides not using fertilizers?
Ooh, so there might be a couple organizations within your neck of the woods. Don't know exactly where you're located, that might have restoration efforts that you could volunteer with to help plant seagrass. I don't know if you can add anything to that, Cora, but those are some of the things that I'm aware of, if you have more info on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like Beth said, I mean, there are definitely organizations like the Brevard Zoo, Florida Oceanographic Society, Marine Discovery Center. They have programs not just to replant seagrasses, but also to do like oyster and clam restoration, living shorelines that help filter the water, clean up the water. So it's actually a better water quality for seagrasses to grow. All of us, I think the person who was asking the question already said avoiding the use of fertilizer, especially now during the rainy season in the summertime, because all that fertilizer washes off into the waterways. If you have a septic tank, make sure that's regularly inspected. If you can convert to sewer, that's the best way to go. But I know not all municipalities, not everyone has that option. But if you do have a septic tank, make sure it's inspected, it doesn't leak, because it's not just fertilizer causing these algae blooms. It is septic tanks and so many other things as well. So there's definitely things we can do, but in terms of seagrass restoration, it is like a former biologist said, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So there's definitely a lot of work that has to go into that, and it's not a quick and easy fix that we can just all try to plant seagrasses and kind of solve the problem, unfortunately.
Okay, next question is, what is the current status and future of the, and they use quotations, endangered or at-risk status of manatees?
So there was a petition to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reclassify the manatees as endangered. And just recently they acknowledged that and warranted there was enough sufficient evidence to do a review to determine whether or not they're going to reclassify the manatee. And I believe that's supposed to come out sometime next year, if I'm correct, by U.S. Fish and Wildlife on their determination where they're going to delist it from threatened to endangered. So it's still in the works, but it's don't know what's going to happen, what the outcome will be, but that decision will be made in the upcoming year, I'm assuming.
Okay, so it looks like we are all caught up on questions and we're coming up pretty close to an hour. If there's any last minute questions, you can throw it in either the chat or the Q&A. Looks like someone is typing. So while they're typing, I'll just put a quick reminder. So this is recorded. We are going to be posting the recording hopefully early tomorrow, and we'll share it with everyone. Just lots of comments saying thank you. This was great, educational, very informative. Thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening.
Happy National Safe Boating Week.